This really makes me rethink the actual intention behind the Pennsylvania grand jury. Hey guys, this is Jules with True Crime Reactions. Disclaimer, everything stated in this video is my opinion and my opinion only. And just like everything else in these cases we discuss here on this channel, everything is alleged. Okay, so I'm recording this on 10/15 of 2025. Bryan Inton very recently put out a video discussing a couple of things about the Bryan Kohberger case with a friend of his that was an attorney. One of the things that they talked about was the Pennsylvania grand jury. Now I'm going to play you the clip here in just a few minutes, but I want to discuss this for a second, just to sort of jog everyone's memories. This situation actually took place right after the grand jury indictment in Idaho. We then started hearing that his parents were subpoenaed to a Pennsylvania grand jury in order to get some information and see if there might be some sort of connection between Bryan Kohberger and this situation, because at the time there wasn't really a lot of information out. So they were trying to see if maybe this wasn't the first time he had done something. Turns out they really don't even have any proof he did this, even though he pled guilty, but that's not what this video is about. Apparently, Bryan Kohberger's parents have been called to testify in front of a grand jury in Pennsylvania. Not Idaho, but Pennsylvania. So at 1:50 today, on May 24th, CNN posted this article. Parents of Idaho student murder suspect have been subpoenaed to testify before Pennsylvania grand jury. The parents of Bryan Kohberger have been subpoenaed to testify before a Monroe County, Pennsylvania investigative grand jury. Kohberger's father is expected to testify before the impaneled grand jury in a sealed proceeding in Pennsylvania on Thursday, so tomorrow, the 25th of May. His mother previously testified before the secretive panel. It doesn't state what day that happened. The parents of the man indicted for the killings of 4 University of Idaho students were subpoenaed in the Pennsylvania jurisdiction where they live and where Bryan Kohberger was arrested last December. Their compelled testimony under oath may be shared with prosecutors in Idaho. Pennsylvania law allows judges to release transcripts of witness testimony before the grand juries to other investigative agencies after the court hearing. News Nation has learned Bryan Kohberger's parents were called to testify before a grand jury in Pennsylvania. The case is related to Xana Smithers, a 45-year-old woman who went missing in May of 2022 in Monroe County, the same county where Kohberger lived and right before he would have moved out of the area to go to Pullman. A source close to the case says Kohberger has a solid alibi and is likely not connected to Smithers' disappearance. There is no proof as of right now that it actually is connected. It seems like they're just wanting to validate that Kohberger isn't involved because they really do believe he is the one who committed these quadruple homicides. After the entire thing was done and over with, the agencies involved came out and put some public postings up to show that they had no connection and no reason to think that Bryan Kohberger was associated with that situation whatsoever. So now I'm going to go ahead and play the clip from Bryan Inton's guest, and then I'll be back.
One thing I've always been a little confused by is basically Bryan Kohberger's parents, which we've reported, were called before a grand jury in Pennsylvania on the death of another woman. It seemed like they were trying to rule Bryan Kohberger out of some of these other unsolved cases in Pennsylvania. But then the proceedings were used to elicit information about Kohberger's early years, and some of that information was going to be used by prosecutors in Idaho. What do you make of that? Is that allowed? I guess that's allowed.
Interestingly enough, I understand why his parents, when they were called before that grand jury, they tried to quash the subpoenas, meaning they tried to say that we should not have to testify before the grand jury because we don't have any relevant information. They were unsuccessful. The rule is that grand jury material is secret. As we know, grand jury is behind closed doors. It's a prosecutorial process. But there are certain exceptions to that rule. And one of those exceptions is sharing information among law enforcement in the investigation of other crimes where whatever is in that grand jury proceeding could be relevant or is relevant to another investigation. Here's the general rule, Bryan, because this is important. So a grand jury proceeding cannot be for discovery purpose, meaning if you have somebody who's indicted, in this case it would have been Kohberger, you have an indicted defendant, you can't use another grand jury proceeding for the purpose of getting discovery material relating to that case. So you can't use it just to get additional information relating to another case. That is not permitted. And that's Supreme Court. It's a violation of the Sixth Amendment, it's a violation of all sorts of other protections for criminal defendants. However, if there is another legitimate proceeding, another legitimate grand jury investigation, a legitimate reason, meaning another crime, then the grand jury proceeding can go forward, and to the extent there's some overlap or some question of overlap, it is valid and appropriate to ask those questions. That's where you get into kind of the gray area, right? What is the purpose? And that's really what the court asks. What was the primary purpose of this particular grand jury proceeding? So I think the reason that his parents were ultimately required to testify is that there was a legitimate grand jury proceeding going on in relation to another case. They provided whatever information they provided that is validly shared with law enforcement. But whatever comes out of that, it's a question mark about whether or not it could actually come into a trial. Because whatever that information is would still be subject to all of the rules of admissibility that exist for any type of evidence that's going to come in. And that grand jury testimony is hearsay. So the way that I could see it actually making its way in is that it is under oath and it could be impeachment material. Meaning, if his mom or his dad were to have taken the stand, whatever they said under oath before the grand jury could potentially be used to impeach them to the extent that there's something that wasn't consistent. It could also be the springboard for a further investigation, and especially delving into his past and maybe finding out about other things that could potentially be relevant. And then it's a question about whether or not it actually is relevant to the case at hand, which prior bad acts and all of that type of evidence is subject to that same scrutiny of admissibility. A general rule doesn't come in unless there's an exception that it falls into. I thought it was very interesting at the time. I get why they tried to quash those subpoenas because it felt targeted, right? But to the extent that there was a valid investigation going on, a grand jury proceeding relating to that case, it's above board from the perspective of the legal requirements.
So it sort of makes me think that they put this Pennsylvania grand jury together kind of already knowing that Bryan Kohberger didn't have anything to do with it. Like maybe they put it together so that they could question his parents, dig into his actual history in Pennsylvania, just to try to actually get info that they could use later on. It really wouldn't shock me. I guess it could have been assumed from the very beginning. It just wasn't really anything that I thought at first. At the time that all of this was going on, I don't think we were heavily questioning too many things. I think we were sort of starting to question stuff. It started looking really kind of wonky at this point, but we didn't have documents. We didn't have facts. It was all just whatever was out there in the media. There wasn't a lot of real truth just yet. So maybe thinking too far into it really just wasn't at the top of my mind. But now going back and knowing everything that we know now, her claiming this about how it's above bar, meaning it's totally okay. What do you guys think about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they put this thing together because they needed something to help them dig more information up? Because let's be serious, until the FBI called them on 12/19 of 2022, Moscow police had never heard of Kohberger. Not the last name, not the family, not him specifically. Nada. They didn't have anything in their records when it came to tips about him prior to this either. This was the very first time they'd even heard of him. So while they obviously had him in custody at this point, they didn't really have a lot of back stuff, and maybe they used this as a way to get that. Maybe they used this as a way to be able to break through certain laws that maybe they wouldn't be able to actually break through because they were from another state. I don't really know how a lot of the back end stuff works. I just know that there's a lot of red tape, a lot of hurdles, a lot of obstacles, but also a lot of really just illegal things that happen. We saw it with the IGG. They admitted to us everything that was accused actually happened, but that it was constitutionally not important. That came from the judge. So again, I'm wondering if they were just like, hey, show me a case. Give me any case in this area that's completely unsolved, and we're going to say, we think he might be involved, so let's go ahead and put a grand jury together. That's what I think happened. That's my assumption now. Because it didn't make sense then. He was found to have no connection way back then, and I'm just curious as to if it was put together so they could use it for something else. That's just my current thought, but let me know what you guys are thinking down in the comments. If you like the way that I present this information and give my opinion, please don't forget to leave a like on the way out. Subscribe to the channel if you have not subscribed already, and please don't forget to make sure that the notification bell is set to all so you don't miss any of my rants, reviews, reactions, updates, or deep dives. See y'all.